Okay, so let me pull up the textbook. This would be so we are continuing on with the respiratory system, right? We would have looked at the cross section of the respiratory system, starting from the nose, moving down to the larynx, then the epiglottis, then the trachea, and eventually the oxygen that you take in finds its way to your lungs, right? And when it goes into your lungs, it becomes oxygenated, and the heart is able to pump that oxygenated blood throughout your body, right? Another thing that was mentioned is that as humans, as living beings, we do what is known as aerobic respiration, and aerobic respiration deals with oxygen, right? So just right, nice. So the lungs is also an area where there is gaseous exchange. And as such, the surface area is very large. So this part of the lung, this part is the cross section here of the lungs, and you can see the surface area is very large. All of these branches here are known as the bronchioles, right? And this little area that looks like a cluster, a little bunch of grapes, is called the alveoli, right? And this is a magnified version here, which shows the surface view of a cluster of alveoli showing the blood supply. So these make up the main parts of the respiratory system. So you have your nasal cavity, epiglottis, larynx, the trachea and the bronchi, your bronchioles, the alveoli. You have your pleural membranes, which is this area here that surrounds the lungs, right? You also have the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. So your intercostal muscles and your diaphragm is in this area here that is directly behind of your rib cage, right? So the purpose of your intercostal muscles is to protect, more or less, to protect the lungs, right? So your external intercostal muscles, they are located between the rib cage. So that fleshy part that's in between your ribs is known as your external intercostal muscles, right? We also looked at the mechanism of breathing and gaseous exchange. So when you breathe in, right, or you inhale, you take in oxygen and it causes your external intercostal muscles to contract, the internal intercostal muscles to relax, your ribs and sternum move upwards and outwards. So you could basically just envision yourself breathing. Well, you can actually do the action of breathing, and you can, when you do that action, you would actually be able to see, witness for yourself how your muscles are able to contract and relax accordingly. So when you exhale, you would notice that your chest tends to expand a little bit as you relax, right? Because air is being pushed out of your lungs due to the increased pressure of you breathing out, right? Um, right. So we also looked at factors affecting the breathing rate. And, as I indicated with HSB deals with lifestyle, right? So it's not just about looking at the biology of things, but also how, as humans, the social aspect or the social aspect of, how we interact as human beings, how that affects um, our organs and so on. So the actual action of breathing is impacted by our lifestyle. If we are obese, if we don't exercise, environmental factors such as being in a polluted area and so on, moving to an area that has high altitude, taking drugs, smoking cigarettes, and so on. right? So this would be the social aspect and how it impacts our health. Uh, right. We also looked at mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I think this was the last point that we looked at, and I showed you a small video. Of course, these videos would be linked as well so that you can also look at it in your free time. I wasn't able to play it with audio, um, so you weren't able to hear the audio. So that's why I say I will link it with the recordings. So we're going to move on to the effects of smoking cigarettes, and we're going to learn a little bit about what it does, right? So when smoking cigarettes, right, we know cigarettes is made from tobacco, and the tobacco leaf itself contains, when it's burnt, right, it it contains numerous chemicals, which include nicotine, tar, and carbon monoxide, right? And all of this is being inhaled through the respiratory system when it is someone smokes. So therefore, it could be said that smoking poses serious health risks, right? And some of which we are going to look at today. So some of the, hold on 1 second. Let me make sure that I'm right. So right. So this is what we're going to look at today, the effects of smoking cigarettes. So the first thing we want to look at is nicotine addiction. So nicotine is the addictive substance that is found in cigarettes. This is one of the reasons why when persons who start smoking and it really becomes a habit, it's difficult for them to curb that habit. It's because of this substance that is contained in cigarettes that make it addictive, right? And this is what makes it extremely difficult for smokers to stop. So addicted smokers need enough nicotine each day to feel normal, right? Another thing is that smoking reduces carrying capacity of the blood. So I would have mentioned this in our previous recording about carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide, what it does, it attaches itself to the hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is what transports the oxygen in blood, right? And as a result, it reduces the amount of oxygen being carried to the blood cells. So as a result, right, this reduces respiration, and persons who smoke, their ability to really keep up with exercising and doing long distance running and so on is greatly impacted, right? If it is a mother is pregnant, she deprives her fetus of oxygen, reducing growth and development. So there are some really negative effects of smoking, as you could see. And the main thing, which we're going to be looking at today as it relates to cigarettes, smoking, and how it affects the respiratory system is damage to the lungs, right? So I also would have indicated in the previous recording a video that showed what a smoker's lungs looks like and what a non-smoker lung looks like, right? So cigarette smoke damages the lungs. It causes mucus production to increase and it paralyzes the cilia. So we know based off our previous notes, right, what the purpose of cilia is, right? It's basically these um, microscopic kind of fibrous um, parts of various organs found in the human body. And its purpose is to cover the surface area of these organs to trap oxygen or trap dirt or bacteria, depending on where the cilia is located, right? And what it does, it stops them from beating so that the mucus is not removed. So the person then develops a persistent cough to try and remove the mucus. So again, the cilia, the purpose of cilia is really to trap, like it's found in your nose and so on. And the purpose of that is to trap um, dirt and dust and so on. So when it's affected, right, and the person isn't able to remove mucus, they end up with a cough because the cilia is unable to do its job. It irritates and inflames the walls of the bronchi and the bronchioles. And we looked at the diagram, which showed the importance of the bronchi and the bronchioles, right? This, together with the increased mucus production and paralysis of the cilia, causes the airways to become obstructed, making breathing difficult. And it leads to something known as chronic bronchitis, right? So when you hear the term bronchitis, you instantly think of lungs and some kind of inflammation of your lungs or your airways, because bronchitis, bronch comes from bronchioles or your bronchi, right? It also causes the walls of the alveoli to become less elastic, and it causes the walls of the alveoli to break down, which decreases their surface area. Remember, we indicated we need the alveoli and their large surface area to be able to hold on to more oxygen, right? And if it's not being able to facilitate gaseous exchange, then you're going to have some problems. Because if it's reducing gaseous exchange, it's going to make exhaling difficult, and it causes air to remain trapped in the lungs, right? This condition is known as emphysema. The bronchioles often collapse when exhaling, obstructing the airways, making exhaling even harder. So there are times when persons who have airways that are collapsed, they need to have a procedure known as a tracheotomy, and they would have to have a tracheostomy put in, right? Smoking also causes cancer of the mouth, throat, esophagus, and lungs. So some components of tar and many other chemicals in cigarette smoke are carcinogenic. These cause mutation in cells and different regions of the respiratory system. This leads to the development of cancerous tumors, right? So eventually, if it is somebody develops both chronic bronchitis and emphysema, right, they end up with what is known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is known as COPD. All right. So this is the, the biology behind breathing, right? How it works and so on, how the respiratory system works. But remember, again, to go back to our last note when we indicated that respiration in itself, it's a term that we use synonymously with breathing, but respiration and breathing are two different things, right? So breathing has to do with the intake of oxygen and exhale of carbon dioxide, right? Whereas respiration has to do with the use and release of energy, right? That is generated via different processes. So in plants, right? Plants don't breathe, but they respire, and that has to do with one of the byproducts of photosynthesis, oxygen, right, being absorbed into the leaves of plants at nighttime, and then carbon dioxide being released. So respiration is catalyzed by enzymes. So you notice that a lot of the terms seem to repeat itself, right? We looked at enzymes during digestion, and we looked at the term catalyzed also during digestion. And basically, what we mean by catalyzed and enzymes, it's essentially the speeding up of a certain process. So enzymes are there to speed up certain processes, right? And to catalyze basically means to facilitate or to start that process, right? So respiration is catalyzed by enzymes and occurs slowly in a large number of stages. Most of the energy released at each stage is used to build energy carrying molecules called ATP. And ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, right? So it's a very fancy chemical term, but you can just put ATP, and anybody who knows about respiration would know exactly what ATP means, right? So an ATP molecule is formed by combining some form of energy released from adenosine diphosphate or ADP molecule and a phosphate group present in the cell. So this is where things get a little bit more complicated in terms of science, right? But the little word equation down to the bottom where you say ADP plus phosphate plus energy is going to give you ATP, and it's a two-way process, as you could see how the arrows are pointing back, right? So ATP is known as the energy currency of cells. Cells earn ATP as a result of energy producing reactions, and they spend it on reactions requiring energy. So think about some actions that require energy that takes place inside of the body. So one, to manufacture complex biologically important molecules, example protein and DNA, for cell growth and repair, for cell division, in active transport to move molecules and ions in and out of cells through their membranes, and for special functions in specialized cells. So contraction of muscle cells, transmission of impulse on nerve cells. So when it is we feel very tired, very low energy. Sometimes persons may, have issues with producing ATP. And ATP, which gives rise to so many functions within our body, so many functions within our cells, when it's not functioning in the way that it should, right? You end up feeling very lethargic. Some persons may have feelings as though they might be getting a stroke because it affects the muscle and so on, right? Um, right. So again, to go back and when we were talking about aerobic respiration, I would have indicated the word aerobic means oxygen, right? So there are two types of respiration. We have aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration would be in the presence of no oxygen. So there are certain living organisms that don't require oxygen in order to carry about their daily quote unquote activities, right? So let's start with aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is a process by which energy is released from food by living cells using oxygen. Aerobic respiration occurs in most cells. It uses oxygen and takes place in the mitochondria. Remember, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? Um, it always produces carbon dioxide, water, and about 38 ATP molecules per molecule of glucose. So here you would see glucose plus oxygen using being catalyzed by enzymes in the mitochondria is going to give us carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So energy is a byproduct of respiration, right? Anaerobic respiration, however, is the process by which energy is released from food by living cells without the use of oxygen. So anaerobic respiration occurs in some cells. It takes place without oxygen in the cytoplasm of cells, right? Um, let's go back to the diagram that we have of the cells so that you can actually see what um, what they are referring to, right? Just give me a sec here. Where is, okay, I think you're supposed to, right. That's a plant cell. No, that's not what I'm looking at. Right, very good. So the animal cell in comparison to the plant cell, let's see. Right, so this is the mitochondrion, which is the powerhouse of the cell, right? And it is, present in both plant and animal cells. They also spoke about the cytoplasm, right? Which is this liquid, I suppose, that all everything just kind of floats about in. So the cytoplasm supports the organelles and they are the site of many chemical reactions, right? So let's go back down to our notes. I think it's page 37. Let's see. Right. So anaerobic respiration occurs in some cells. It takes place without oxygen in the cytoplasm of the cell. So this is where it's an organelle where some processes in the cell takes place. The products of anaerobic respiration vary and it produces considerably less energy per molecule of glucose than aerobic respiration. Yeast cells, certain bacteria, and muscle cells are capable of carrying out anaerobic respiration, right? So if you ever wondered how bacteria is able to survive, it's because they don't need oxygen in order to survive, right? They're able to carry out their functions, bodily functions, cellular functions, and so on without oxygen being present. So for instance, making bread and alcoholic beverages, yeast cells carry out anaerobic respiration known as fermentation. So the process of fermentation means that oxygen is not present. It produces ethanol, carbon dioxide, and two ATP molecules per molecule of glucose. So when making bread, the yeast ferments sugar present in the dough. The carbon dioxide produced form bubbles in the dough. So whenever you look at a bubbly fermented beverage like kombucha, I don't know if you're familiar with kombucha, which is a type of fermented black tea, right? There are so many fermented things out there. And when you open something that is fermented, it's a lot of air, gas being released. So the carbon dioxide produced from bubbles in the dough which cause it to rise. When baked, the heat from the oven causes the bubbles to expand, which kills the yeast and evaporates the ethanol, right? So part of the fermentation process, as indicated, is that alcohol is produced. That's how alcohol is even made in the first place, right? It's the fermentation of fruits, right? So the fermentation of fruits, which contains a certain amount of sugar, right? So the yeast ferments because of the sugar that is present. When, as the process of fermentation takes place, right? The ethanol level reaches a very high concentration, and that is what kills all the yeast. And it stops the fermentation process, and now you have alcohol. That's how alcohol is basically made, right? Making yogurt. So yogurt, I don't know if you're aware of this, but yogurt contains a lot of bacteria, but good bacteria, which helps your gut, right? We also have producing biogas. So biogas, this kind of links back to agriculture. So biogas or using a biodigester involves breaking down animal waste, right? So certain bacteria used to break down organic matter such as manure and garden waste anaerobically in an anaerobic digester, or what is known as a biogas digester. This produces biogas, which is a mixture of approximately 60% methane and 40% carbon dioxide and traces of other gases. This gas or biogas can be used as a fuel for cooking, heating, and generating electricity. So farmers who utilize, the gases produced on farms back into their farm is actually, making a really good decision, right? Next, we have something called oxygen debt. So what is oxygen debt? Muscle cells can carry out anaerobic respiration during strenuous exercise. During strenuous exercise, if oxygen cannot be delivered to the muscle quickly enough for the demands of aerobic respiration, the cells begin to respire anaerobically. This produces lactic acid and two ATP molecules per molecule of glucose, right? Lactic acid builds up in the muscle cells and begins to harm them, causing fatigue and eventually collapse as they stop contracting. The muscle cells are said to have a buildup of oxygen debt. This debt must be repaired directly after exercising by resting and breathing deeply so that the lactic acid can be removed by respiring it aerobically. So one of the side effects of exercise and so on is your muscles produce something called lactic acid. But if you're not taking the time to sit and relax and breathe properly, right, then you're going to be facing some dire consequences to those actions, right? So I want you to look at these revision questions because I think they would be really helpful in this chapter. Right, so let me stop sharing. Where is my Zoom?